Greetings, fellow Alpiners. Making a quick video to show you a modification that I'm doing right now, which is going to allow me to get water from a portable water jug like that into the Alpine's freshwater system. So in my previous campers, I've always had a gravity fill, which is for the freshwater tank, which is basically just a cap with a hose going straight down into the tank. You'd put your garden hose in there, or you could actually dump water out of a jug into there and it would go through. This camper and most new ones don't seem to have that. So the only way to add water is through the valve. I've got the Anderson can't leak valve, which we talked about before. It definitely can leak, but mine's been pretty good, so continuing to use it. So there's a couple different ways that you could get water into the tank. Currently, if you want to add water to the tank, you would spin this valve, which is not easy to do. And by the way, if you want these valves to last longer, never move them while they're under pressure. That seems to make them wear out quicker. So move this valve only when there's no pressure on this. But if we were going to fill this tank right now, the freshwater tank for boondocking, which is camping off the grid with no water supply, or true boondocking is also no electrical supply. Although where we're going next week for our first trip, it does actually have electricity, just no water at the site, which is a little unusual. But it'll be our first time even going semi off the grid. Everywhere else we've been to all these years pretty much had water and power. But this place has no water at the site. Only at the beginning of the campground they have a water station where you can fill. So I anticipate I'm going to run out of fresh water with the rig before I leave, so I wanted to be able to refill the tank. And was looking for a way to do it utilizing the pump that's already on it. I have seen a couple different things. Some guys will use like a electric drill pump and turn this to fill, and that does work. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to try to use the ability to draw water through this, which you can do through the sanitize / winterize selection on the Anderson valve. In that position, when you run the pump on the inside, the electric pump that's built in, this will draw water. It'll actually draft water out of a can or a jug, which is what I'm going to attempt to make happen here. So that way I can absolutely fill water without having to hold a jug up or to run a drill pump or anything like that. Now, the problem with that is if you, in that position, the only way it will draw water in is if you have a spigot open inside the camper. So obviously any water that's drawn in from your water jug is just going to go right out through the spigot. The pump just won't run unless it has a demand. And so we have to bypass that with a set of valves and lines, which is exactly what I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it. Okay, so the materials that I'm going to need to splice into the water system to make this simple bypass, not too many things. You're going to need a length of the 1/2-inch blue PEX pipe. I'm going to use 2 shark bite 1/2-inch tees. You can see them both there. And then a ball valve. Also, I'm using shark bite for everything. That way you don't have to worry about crimping or anything. These things are solid. And then you're going to need 4 shark bite 90-degree elbows. At least that's how, for what I'm doing. Now, yours could be a little different depending on how you plumb it. And one thing, if you can find the plastic versions of these, it's probably completely fine. This is pretty low pressure stuff. I read very good reviews on the plastic stuff, and you'll save probably $20-25. All this stuff together, the valve itself is about $20, so I probably have about $60-70 in parts right here. So it's not exactly the cheapest thing to do, but I really think this is going to add a bit of flexibility on how I can get water if we start, because we'd like to start doing a little bit more stuff off the grid, and this has always been one little bit of a concern for me. So we'll see how well this works. Now, the first step in the process was, of course, gaining access to the equipment area. Some of my other videos you've seen where I've been in here before. Here's that fix to get rid of the anti-siphon valve for the black tank flush system, which we discussed in one of the previous videos. So this is the behind the scenes version of the, or shot of the inside of the camper's equipment area. So if you haven't been back here before, it's a little overwhelming at first. There's so much going on, but you can pretty much figure it out if you just take your time. So here's the back side of the Anderson valve that we're going to be working on today. I actually have one of the fittings off, but your valve could be different. I know they're putting newer versions on some of these different campers, but they all essentially do the same. And now all that is just, it's just selecting which source of the water is going to be used. So in my case, it's very easy to follow. This is where you hook the hose up on the outside for your city water. It's also where you hook up if you're winterizing or sanitizing. And then in my case, it's also going to be able to be used as a fill, a suction fill to draw water out of the of a freshwater source, which is going to be a water can, what we'll do at the end of the video. So if I follow this line, it's very easy to follow. It comes right back up to the center of the valve. So I know that of the four, there are 4 different connections on this valve. So I've already identified one. This is the source of the water coming into the system. So I already know what that one is. And then it took me a little bit just to figure out where all the rest of these went. This is disconnected right now. This was originally connected here. This was also easy to figure out because I could trace this line going back down, and it disappears into the back of the camper, and it's not teed off anywhere. And I know that goes directly to the freshwater tank itself. So this is an important line for us for this modification, because this is going to be the one that we need to get water into. And I verified that, by the way, by turning this valve to fill on the outside, the tank position, while it was connected, and went ahead and ran water through it. I could feel the water going through this line, and there was no water going through any other lines except for the center one. You can actually feel it, so I knew for sure that was the water fill line that I needed to tap into. So we'll be cutting into that one. Now, so we know that's going to get water to the tank. So now where will we get the water from? So with the valve in the winterized position, this becomes a suction side of the pump now. So that's good, because that's what we want. We want to be able to draw water up out of that can that's going to be outside by a hose, which we'll talk about in a minute, or I'll show you. But as long as you're in the winterized position, you're going to get water sucked from the outside into the system. It's going to travel through the valve. It's going to go into the suction side of the pump, which you can tell the suction side of the pump because it has this strainer. And then the water is going to come through the pump under pressure, and it's going to follow this line up on mine anyways. And again, yours might be a little different. Obviously the blue is cold water. That means anything downstream of this fitting right here is all going to be pressurized cold water. And all we want to do is tap into that and bypass the system. And the reason that we have to bypass the rest of this is because the pump has a demand sensor. Basically, it's a pressure sensor. So once the pump pressurizes, it automatically shuts off. So the pump won't run unless there's a spigot open or faucet open somewhere in the camper. As soon as those are closed, it pumps it up to its predetermined pressure, and then this pump shuts down automatically. Well, that's not going to work for us with the modification that we're doing. So I'm going to have to bypass that. So what we'll do is this. So what I'm going to do is, this is the line that goes to the tank again, and I need to get water into this line, and I'm going to get it from the pressurized side of the water system. I've identified where I want to tap in. I can essentially tap into any of these lines. Anything after this is going to have pressure once I activate the pump. So I'm just going to choose the line here that works best for my plumbing, where it's going to end up, because I'm going to mount that ball valve in the water bay on the other side of this piece of wood, this wall right here. That way everything is in one spot. So think ahead, if you're going to do this, exactly which one of these lines. There are several lines to choose from, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. You just want to choose the one that's going to ergonomically work for you. So you want to make sure that you don't have any sharp bends in the PEX pipe. Little bends are okay. So just kind of think, I would say, you know, sort of fit things before you cut, and that way you know it's going to lay that out. So it's going to, I'll show you how that's going to look. Before you start making any plumbing changes or anything, you're going to want to find a place for the valve that's going to fit. You're going to need to leave room for a 90-degree elbow at each one of these, and then also you're going to need to leave room for the handle itself to swing as you use it. So make sure you check this out before you make any decisions on before you start drilling through these through this wall here. Also, you'll notice that the valve I chose has these drop ears. They make the valve without it, but for a couple dollars more you get the drop ears, which is great because whenever you do find the spot for it, you can tap into this wall with a pair of wood screws and mount that nice and securely so you don't have it flopping around in here. I found it useful to pre-assemble this section of the setup that I'm putting together because this helps me figure out the footprint in here and where on the wall I'm going to mount it. So I just took two 90-degree elbows, very short section of PEX pipe, just enough so that these sit fully in here. Could have made it a tiny bit smaller, but definitely got to make sure you have long enough. So this is about as short as you're gonna make it if you go this route. So now it's just a matter of figuring out on the wall where I want it. You can go horizontal. I could find a place vertically. Just remember, you gotta have enough room for this valve to swing. It's going to look like that when the valve is closed, actually, and that's going to be closed most of the time. In fact, I'm only going to open that when I'm drawing fresh water out of a bucket or a canister jug or something like that. So you've got to make sure that you have enough room to swing that thing 90 degrees. And then, of course, you need to go on the other side of this wall, which we're going to do in a moment, and make sure that you have a clear spot to run the hose through here as well. So I'm going to end up marking this where these two 90s go through the wall. And you need to drill a hole big enough. If you're going to use this dog ear type thing, you need to drill a hole big enough to allow the actual elbow to go through the wall, not just the hose. Otherwise you won't get this flush, and you'll see that in a minute too. So after looking around, trying to figure out the best place in here for this, for a couple reasons I've decided to go low down here in the compartment. Now I've checked it out. I've made sure that the valve can swing. It's not going to interfere with this valve, you know, my gray tank or my black tank or my other gray tank over here. It's not going to interfere with the hose outlet I have above it. So it's a pretty clear place. But one of the other reasons I chose a lower section in here, I could have gone way up high, but I'd like the ability to drain out this line if I had to for some reason. And on the bottom of the valve I bought, there is a drain plug right here. And you'll see in a moment that the hoses that I'll be connecting to this, they actually rise up on the other side. So I live in Florida, never had to winterize this, but you never know where we'll end up. So I wanted to be able to, of course you can blow the lines out, but this has the ability, since it'll be kind of a low point in this part of the circuit, theoretically I should be able to open up that drain valve and drain out any water that's at least in the circuit for the most part that I've made. Probably not a huge deal, but since it has that feature, I'm going to go with a lower area. So I marked it with two little pencil marks where I'm going to be drilling through the wall. I'm going to drill out a hole a little bigger than I need. That way it can be, it can be a little more tolerant as far as how I put it in there. I'm going to drill two 1-inch holes in there. I could probably get away with 3/4, but eventually I'll find some sort of cover like this to clean it up, make it look nice. But for right now, I'm just going to have two holes in here, which we're going to do. Now on the back side of that, you can see these two low point drains that come from the factory. So all I did was use those as a reference. And then coming around here they are right here. And you can see I have all this clear space. There's not going to interfere with anything. It's a nice blank area to make the install and not interfere with any of the plumbing that's there. All right, it's time to drill. I made those marks just on the outside of where the elbow is going to go through. It's more of a vertical reference for me than anything else. So I'm just going to line the outside of that up. All right, nice clean hole there. And let's take a quick look. Got lots of room here. Yeah, I definitely could have gone with a smaller hole, but that's okay. I don't mind that. I'll button that up later and make it look nicer. But that gets it done for now. Now I just got to drill another one in there and I'll be set. Okay, next up we're going to splice into the water line that goes into the tank. This is the freshwater tank line. So we're going to tap into that first. And that's just a simple matter of cutting any place you have a good spot. We're going to put a T, a three-way push-on shark bite T, and that's going to allow us to tap into that line. Okay, we've got the line split. This is the water tank fill line. We've got a T in it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go down from here and make it as long as I need to, and then it's going to right elbow off. And it's going to go, sorry, mosquitoes are in here. It's going to go from here down to wherever I need to get, so where I'm fairly even to one of these two holes. This one's one I'm going to use. So just a matter of kind of sizing things up and getting it through there. So I wanted to show it to you before I did it. A little tip for you. I find it easier I did find it easier if you put these lines into the valve first. You want to get them sized up. I cut these approximate so they'll be good on the other side, but it's easier to go ahead and make these connections here and here, and then stick the hose through the wall, because if you try to connect this valve with it just sticking out like that, it's going to be a lot harder to do. But essentially that's how it's going to look when it's all said and done. But if you make those connections on this side and then just put it through, then when you come in here, it'll be a lot easier to work with, rather than trying to deal with it on the other side of that bulkhead. All right, I've got the hose through the bulkhead. The valve is on the other side of that hole. I've made my first connection here. This is going to be the going up into the actual tank fill line, which goes down here. Make sure I had to cut this. This was supported by a big zip tie. I'm going to redo that because you don't want all this flexing going down the road. It's kind of hard on the back side of that valve. I think the PEX pipe is stiff enough to cause an issue. So you definitely want to make sure you have all this stuff supported so that it's nice and tight. And I'll button that up after I'm all done. I just needed to be able to move it around to get to where I wanted. The last line I have to put in or connect up is the other side of the valve here. And it's just going to go right into, this is the pressurized side of the water system. So you can see that PEX pipe here is a little long, so I'm going to trim this up. Just make sure that you leave yourself enough. The PEX goes in about 3/4 of an inch into the sleeve, so you always want to make sure that you bottom that pipe out, because that's how it gets that good seal. So make sure you leave yourself plenty of room. But I'm going to pull this tight. I'm going to pull it tight so that I can see the back of you can see the brass elbow right there. That lets me know that I can, when I want to go ahead and screw that valve to the wall, I'll be able to do it without pushing too hard this way. So I'm going to have to trim the pipe accordingly. All the connections are now made, and you can see all the elbows, the T's. In order to do this, by the way, it took 2 T's, 4 elbows, and then 1 valve outside. And then I bought about a 10-foot section of PEX pipe, which is a lot more than I needed, but it's all right. I'm going to leave it on the camper. You never know. There's a lot of PEX pipe on these, so it doesn't weigh anything, and I'm just going to throw it somewhere and have it on board as a spare. But let me go over the water flow. I'll explain to you how this is going to work. So with the valve outside in the sanitized / winterized position, this then becomes a suction side. So this pump does have the ability to draft water or to suck the water out, self-priming. So that's how you're able to winterize. So that's what's going to happen here. So with that valve in that position, I will turn and that valve in the winterized position, and the valve I just installed in the open position, that's important. I'll explain why in a minute. What's going to happen is when I turn this pump on via the, I'm just going to use the app, because I use the app on with the in command really well. If you don't want to use the app, then you would probably want to put a separate switch out here for this pump. Otherwise, somebody inside will have to go inside and turn it on. Either way, once the pump gets electricity, it's going to start priming, and it's going to keep pumping water until it has enough resistance to build pressure. This circuit right here prevents that from happening. It's going to just free flow water right into the tank. So here's how the water flow works. Water is going to come in here under suction, not pressure, because of the way the valve is set to sanitize / winterize. It's going to come through here. It's going to go into the center of the valve, and I haven't touched any of these. These are hooked up the way they were from the factory. From there, because of the way this valve is set out here, then the water then leaves the valve. It goes down through this pipe right here, this hose, and it goes down into the intake side of the pump. Remember, we talked about the strainer. That's the intake side. The water then goes through the pump, out the pressurized side, and into the blue side of the water system, which is your freshwater side. After that, all these blue hoses are all these blue PEX pipes, they're pressurized water. And that would normally just run to your sink or your shower or what have you. What we want to do though is, what we have done is we've bypassed that and we've allowed the water to go somewhere else. And what I did was I tapped into, this is actually a low point drain. I tapped into that, and that's where the water is going to go out to this valve. It's going to flow through the valve and back up to this water fill line, which would normally fill the water tank. Because all the spigots in the camper are closed, the water has nowhere else to go except for down to the water tank, which is where we want it to go. So that's what it looks like. I hope it's not too confusing. We're going to test it now and see how well it works. The system is now completely put together, and we're going to test it. And if you're seeing this video, it means that it worked. If it didn't work, I probably wouldn't show it to you. All kidding aside. So here's what we're going to do. All right, first things first. We're going to turn this from tank fill over to winterize / sanitize. I have a little valve on my water intake, so to make sure that's open, which it's in line with the valve, which means it's open. This would be closed. We don't want it to be closed. Okay. And then we're going to open this valve. And I'm going to put some signage in here when I'm all done, to make sure that I don't forget that, or if my wife was in here or somebody else that wasn't familiar. And lastly, I have a short section of hose, pardon the dirty hose, but it's just for demonstration, going down in here to a 6-gallon water jug. So I'm going to turn on the pump now via the in-command system. All right, I don't know if you can hear that or not, but the water pump is now on, which means it's drafting, should be drafting water out of that, which was full. If you come in here, you can hear it running. I don't see any leaks. Let me see if I can feel any water. It's kind of hard to tell if there's water going through there. I believe there is. But I filled my water tank up with the hose before I did this. So if this is working correctly and the water is going where it should be going, it should be coming out the overflow in the rear of the camper. So we're gonna go check that right now. There we go, success. So it is pulling water out of that jug, and it is putting it into the tank, which I said, like I told you a minute ago, I filled manually with the city water here at the house. But that water is coming from that jug via the internal pump, which is pulling it in, which is exactly what I wanted to see. So that's a success. And hopefully you can hear that pump. It's still running. And I just wanted to show you what will happen if I turn this valve off while I'm doing this operation. Just a couple seconds, that pump is going to shut down. And there it goes. Now it's shut down because it can no longer bypass the water system in the camper, and it's doing its normal job, which is pressurizing the spigots and the faucets inside the camper. So in that position, if I were to go inside and open up the sink or try to use the shower, I'll have water. if I open this back up, it's going to continue to fill the water tank. So still drafting out of this canister here. Works great. Just to show you that everything is working as designed. I've disconnected the water intake now, and this would be how it would be if I was dry camping. So I've moved that lever to dry camping. The water pump is on, but my freshwater fill valve is now closed, putting it into the normal position. And I hooked up my outside shower hose just to show you, but everything still works. You can hear the pump. Back there, there's some air in the line just clearing it out, but it works just as it's supposed to. That's coming off the pump. All right, just wanted to come out and finish up a few more things on this little project. Pardon the noise in the background, it's raining pretty hard. So I added some decals, just in case my wife was out here or I was away. Sometimes when we're camping, I have to leave for work. I would like her to be able to understand how this works. In case I wasn't here, so I just added some signage to it. That way, it's pretty self-explanatory, really. And at least that's the way I could walk her through it if I needed to. So we're at the campground, and I'm using my system for the first time, and it is working like a charm. You can see pretty quick how quick the water level is going to go down here, and it's pretty hands-free once you get it set, and it's moving steady. It takes about 2 minutes or so, maybe a little less for the 5-gallon jug, around 2 minutes to bring this thing down. And I'm using just my regular 30-foot hose. No problem with the long hose run. This is the maiden voyage for this system, and I'm very happy with it so far. So it's in here doing its job, using the winterized, sanitized system to fill my water tanks with that valve.